Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to episode 349 of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic. Kevin Adnan is, I believe he's an entertaining guest tonight. So shout out to Adnan. Glad he's having a good time. We're going to have Tre'Shon Diaz joining us in just a little bit as well. But we're going to bring you guys everything you need to know about this upcoming Bills matchup. Can the Falcons take down the Buffalo Bills on Monday Night Football? That's going to be the crux of our discussion tonight. But other than that, I'm going to be talking about the most recent updates on the injury report. Going to be talking about our thoughts sort of on how the Falcons look going into this matchup, how we feel going into this little mini gauntlet we have with the Falcons playing teams with two of the best records in both the NFC and AFC, with the Bills coming up obviously this week on primetime and the 49ers coming up, and that's going to be a road game even next week on Sunday Night Football. So a little bit of a little mini gauntlet here for the Falcons coming out of a pretty tough opening quartet to their schedule. But thank you guys for stopping in to tonight's Falcoholic Live presented by FanDuel. We are going to be getting into all that stuff and more tonight. And like I said, we'll have Tre'Shon hopping in when he's available. So looking forward to talking more with him. But other than that, we're going to start off tonight taking a look at the most recent injury updates for the Falcons, because those are arguably the most important bit of information we've gotten since the start of the bye week. As you guys know, a lot of Falcons players on IR at this point. You know, obviously Caleb McGarry's out for the season, but there are some other guys we're really looking to get back soon. AJ Terrell among them, not technically on IR, but he has missed the previous two games. Also, a number of other players we'll check in on at this point. So, right off the bat, the good news is that AJ Terrell, star Falcons cornerback, for those of you that may not know who AJ Terrell is that are here, however, maybe the five of you at this point, AJ Terrell is going to return to practice this week. His status for the game against the Bills is still up in the air. We'll see how that sort of develops over the course of the week. But Raheem Morris sounded pretty confident in his press conference that Terrell was going to be available to play on Monday Night Football. It helps, obviously, to have the bye week. And, of course, the Monday night game is a little bit later in the week. If you're wondering why we don't have an official injury report, it's because they're playing on Monday night. So we don't actually get the first injury report until Thursday. But the good news, obviously, Terrell's slated to return to the practice field, and we'll see how he develops over the course of the week. But at this point, I would be surprised if Terrell is not playing on Monday Night Football. And that would obviously be a huge boost to the Falcons secondary, which has honestly performed pretty well. Even without Terrell, it's obviously nice to see D. Alford, I think, perform at a high level for like 1.5 games. The Commanders took a little bit more of a direct approach in targeting D. Alford, and Deebo Samuel had some success against him. But I think ultimately Alford deserves some props. I thought he handled his stint as basically playing cornerback one pretty well, and we got some good play out of him. The Falcons obviously are the number one pass defense in the NFL in terms of yardage, and they look good in terms of some other advanced metrics as well. So Terrell's only played 1.5 games, so D. Alford has been the outside corner opposite Mike Hughes for a lot of those games. So shout out, I think D. Alford does deserve some props, but still good to have AJ Terrell coming back. Hopefully, Terrell's just a much bigger corner, someone that's more capable of matching up against physicality. Could be a good matchup for Keon Coleman, who the Bills have targeted a lot in some games and much less in others. I don't know how big of an impact Keon Coleman will be in this one, but at this point, Terrell being back out there should help the Falcons contain a Bills passing game that, is kind of short on like A-list guys, but has been quietly pretty effective, and Josh Allen obviously has a lot to do with that. So happy to see AJ Terrell coming back, and hamstring injuries, they do have a tendency to linger, but hopefully the time off plus the bye week is enough, and they're not rushing Terrell out there for Monday Night Football, and he's good to go. Would be happy to obviously see Terrell back as soon as possible. I think we all would. The other names on the list, the most notable is Taquan Graham, the Falcons defensive tackle. Played quite a bit of one tech and has really been one of Atlanta's better nose tackles thus far through 2024. And, a lot of years, and he was in the preseason as well. he is being activated. His 21-day practice window is being activated off of IR. So at this point, I would say Graham has a pretty good shot to play on Monday Night Football, assuming he's able to progress all right. And, I don't know exactly how Graham's going to rotate in at this stage. Graham is, again, a nose tackle. They've gotten some pretty good snaps out of Kale London to the point where you're not necessarily rushing. So if Graham's not ready, I don't think the Falcons are going to rush him back onto the field this week. But I do think Graham is a better overall player than LaCale London and would be, a nice player to add to the rotation, especially at one tech. And we'll see if he's ready. I think that would be a nice boost to Falcons interior that's been pretty good on the whole. They haven't really had an elite player in that group, but I think everyone has contributed and they've gotten some good play overall out of that group. The one area where you could say the Falcons defense is the weakest is probably against the run. So getting a guy like Taquan Graham back can't hurt in that regard. So we'll see what happens with his progression this week. But if he practices pretty much every day, I would expect him to be activated off of IR going into Monday Night Football. And then, that was really the only two guys that we had big announcements on. We were hoping to hear more about Troy Anderson's status. Today, we haven't heard much yet. There's a couple of guys that also we're waiting to hear more on, and that would obviously be, Braylon Trice, who was put on IR going into the season. That injury was a bit sketchier. We weren't exactly sure what that was going to be. The timeline was very, very shadowy with that one. No update there. Obviously Troy Anderson, no update there. And I think Jordan Fuller still has another week to go, maybe 2 weeks before he could be activated. So he's not necessarily someone we're going to hear about for a little bit longer. So at that point, we're just kind of waiting and seeing with the rest of these guys. Obviously, Darnell Mooney is someone to monitor as well. Had what was considered to be a minor hamstring injury in week 4 against the Commanders. And, at this point, we haven't heard any update. If he's practicing, it's a good sign for his availability. If he's not practicing, that's obviously very worrisome. We haven't really gotten what we've been hoping for out of Darnell Mooney thus far. It's still pretty early in the season. And, obviously a long way to go with Mooney missing most of training camp. Makes sense that he was going to take a little while to get back. But, I think Mooney is someone that is really important to this passing attack. He's one of the more dynamic athletes that the Falcons have at their disposal. It would be great to get him back out there and healthy and on the same page as Penix. So fingers crossed that he's out there, this week when the Falcons start practicing on Thursday. But to this point, still not really sure what's going on there. And hopefully things will continue to improve, but don't really know. So as soon as we hear anything, we'll let you guys know. But that's kind of the other major one that's out there. And I certainly hope that we're able to get another guy in Storm Norton. That's probably the other one most people are interested in. It's been a little less critical given that Elijah Wilkinson has been largely fine at right tackle, which is great. I put out a tweet today with some pass protection statistics where we've seen the Falcons offensive line as a whole. I think in this pass rush aggregate that was put together by Ben Baldwin, the number 2 pass protection offensive line in all of the NFL. And that both speaks to how the Falcons have done a great job at cobbling this together and really haven't missed a beat in pass protection with the loss of Caleb McGarry for the season and also, letting Drew Dahlman walk, who was one of their biggest, free agents, whether they signed or re-signed this offseason. Shout out to Elijah Wilkinson for holding it down there. And the Falcons as a whole, I think, have performed very well, and especially in pass protection where they've been really strong, and they've done a great job at keeping Michael Penix clean and allowing him to have time to develop. It's nice to see the Falcons give a young quarterback some protection. Love to see that. That hasn't necessarily been the case around the NFL. I'm looking at you, Tennessee Titans. So, we'll hope that Storm Norton's back. I think at this point, just having Storm Norton back for depth purposes is the most important thing. Luckily he hasn't been needed to this point, knock on wood, right? But having him available, even if he's not going to start, at this point, I don't see the Falcons pulling Elijah Wilkinson for Norton. I think just getting him back as soon as possible would be great, just to have that assurance that if anyone needs to take a couple snaps off or if there's any issues, we got Storm Norton in the wings instead of the next guy on the roster, which I'm not sure would be functional. Like, let's be honest there. Jack Nelson has not really even been practicing much given his own injury concerns. So not really sure where the Falcons would turn at that point. Hopefully we won't have to find out. But as a whole, Falcons offensive line been really nice, and shout out to all those guys for holding it down in pass pro during the 2024 season. And on that note, we're going to have Tre'Shon Diaz joining us here. Give me just 1 second, folks. Tre'Shon, what's up? 8:15 on the dot. That was like an assassin-like precision there. So,
man of my word.
Yes. How are you doing tonight, Tre'Shon? Appreciate you hopping on.
Yeah, of course. Doing well, excited to get into it here and talk about this matchup against the Bills. It's it's a pretty interesting one. I think there's like a couple of trends that both of the teams have kind of established early here that are going to kind of get tested tonight. The Falcons, good pass rush, honestly, that's kind of started off here in the Bills. According to NFL Pro, they have like the lowest pressure rate in the league right now. So this pass rush that the Falcons have is going to get tested. And then I think both these run defenses are going to get tested, kind of seeing if the Falcons are going to be able to impose their will. And then if the Falcons defense is going to be able to stand up and kind of keep Cook in check and then just kind of take it to, make this a stop Josh Allen, contain Josh Allen kind of thing, put as much of it on his shoulders and get them off balance, because that kind of worked for the Patriots.
Yeah. I think that's a great blueprint to how you might be able to keep the Bills in check and be able to counterpunch against, a team that is among the best in the NFL this year. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So it's going to be a tough matchup. And of course, guys, give Tre'Shon a follow. He's at Ep349 on Twitter. Also, all Trey Phases, his new channel and Twitter account for some more in-depth film breakdowns. Definitely give that a look if you haven't checked it out yet. But yeah, I just finished kind of recapping the injury report, but is there any notes you have on the guys, on the updates we've gotten so far? Obviously, some guys still haven't heard much, but anything you want to add about the injury report so far?
Nothing that you probably didn't touch on. We know Taquan Graham's like 21-day window started, and I think that's somebody who can give you some good early down play, especially against the run there. I think he's an upgrade over LaCale London, who was like their practice squad nose tackle last year. So I don't know if that means he's going to be able to, obviously 21-day window. So it's never really a guarantee, and they haven't really like talked or hyped it up too much. They have been more positive about the AJ Terrell return, but they're qualifying those statements still. So, I'm like, I want to be like, yes, Terrell's back. But, I think it was even Taryn like today went back because she put out a tweet that was like, the Falcons expect AJ Terrell to be back. And she's like, okay, I should have like maybe clarified a little more, like he's going to practice and they feel good, but we don't know. And so I was like, oh no. So, we'll see, but probably, yeah, I don't really have any other notes over anything on that injury report.
Yeah, it would certainly be nice to get a couple of these depth guys back. Like I was talking about Troy Anderson, like the depth at linebacker has not been tested, and I would like it to stay that way, obviously. But if we had Troy Anderson available, I'd feel a lot better about it. We obviously don't. So, I have no idea about Troy Anderson. I've been asked about Troy Anderson probably more than any other player this week. I have no idea, guys. I don't think anyone knows. I don't even know if the Falcons doctors know, to be honest with you. So at some point we'll hear an update. I don't know anything about when that will be. But the most important one, obviously, is AJ Terrell. And they seem pretty confident. The fact that they didn't like immediately clarify that tweet to me signals that like they're pretty confident like that he's going to be back, but not 100%. And I think that's fair. I think at this point I'd label him like probable, if I had to speculate. But hamstring injuries can be tricky. I'm sure they want to see how he responds to practicing for a few days. And the nice thing is it's Monday, so you get an extra day to prepare as well. That should help here. And can't think of a better time to have Terrell available than going into this little gauntlet we got here with the Bills and the 49ers. But, speaking about this Bills game, per FanDuel right now, Falcons, the line hasn't moved, I think, since we last talked to each other. I think the Falcons are still 4.5 point, I believe, underdogs at this point. going
Home
into this
dogs.
game. Home dogs, which has been a familiar place to be for the Falcons thus far this season. Um, it's a matchup that I don't think anyone, maybe a few very Homer fans, would have predicted a dub here. But I don't think anyone would have necessarily predicted a big dub here. But we did just see the Bills felled by the Patriots, who are considered to be, I think, kind of a frisky team, but not necessarily a dominant team in any facet. So that maybe gives hope for the Falcons here, pulling off a sort of frisky upset. But how are you feeling right now, just big picture, about the Falcons' ability to pull this upset off on prime time?
Yeah, I mean, like big picture wise, like we talked about this, in our last show, like this team plays up to like competition. So like I'm not really like there is no like fear of like, oh, it's the Bills, and that's not like overconfidence or anything. That's just kind of like that's just how this team operates. Like, they they have shown the ability to like play up to anybody's potential and play down to it. And so I think that, primetime last year, they were money, like one of the best primetime performing teams last year. So, even throwing that into the mix doesn't really do anything for me. And like you said, I would put the Patriots like very similar to like Atlanta, like second year quarterback from that draft class that Penix was in, young coach, like Vrabel's obviously not like young, but like he's just getting there. They're kind of getting things going. They made some good moves, and like you said, frisky, but like it's not like a dominant team. And they showed you that if you show up and play your own game, you can definitely take out the Bills. And we even saw the Saints like competing with the Bills for about 2.5 quarters as well. So this team isn't like invincible. You obviously respect Josh Allen as a player, but it's a team sport, as they say.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's a very good team, and obviously they have an MVP caliber quarterback in Josh Allen. That's always going to give you an edge no matter what, because you can just pull some stuff out of your ass with Josh Allen that most teams simply aren't capable of. And as someone who lives in upstate New York, I get to hang out with Bills fans a lot. They're very confident, and they should be. This is a good team. They're dealing with a lot of injuries on the defensive side of the ball. Matt Milano's kind of one of their linchpins, and it looks like he will be out once again going into this game. That's obviously a big loss for them. And the Bills as a whole haven't been maybe as dominant as we're used to seeing them. Like you mentioned, that the Saints gave them a pretty good game, and then the Patriots kind of had them on the ropes in this one. With the Buffalo Bills, their biggest weakness right now is that run defense. They're allowing 146 rushing yards per game, which is like in the bottom 5 of NFL teams. And then they're 31st in yards per carry allowed with 5.6. That's not a good stat to have against the Falcons, who have shown a willingness, I think, to just run the ball if they need to. And this could be a game where that comes into play. How important do you think Atlanta's run game is going to be in this potential upset?
Yeah, well, that was like one of the first things I said was like these run defenses are really going to get tested in this one. And there's like a different element to this because it's we're going to see, like we saw a little bit of it with Mariota, but he's getting older in age. But Josh Allen's going to take off. So, when it comes to like taking into account the run game here for the Bills, obviously worrying about him. For Atlanta, I think that we've kind of seen, like you said, Zach Robinson has shown like the willingness to just kind of like commit to running the football. We saw in the Vikings game where it was really just kind of like, hey, Mike, we're going to ask you to make some simple passes here to keep these drives alive when we need it, but we're really going to lean on Bijan and Tyler. And in the 2 games that they've done that, they've won those games. So it seems to me that like, if you get that run game going, if you get those running backs, active and a part of the game plan every single quarter, you're going to have a good chance at winning this game. And I do think, like you said, based on the Bills numbers here from an efficiency standpoint, that this is a really big opportunity for this, rushing attack to take the next step, because while we are seeing, good production and everything out of Bijan, his rushing yards over expected are towards the tops of the league, which means he's making the most out of plays, good and bad. And there hasn't always been a clear run lane. He does create a lot of opportunities for himself. So this is really like a chance for this Falcons O-line to kind of like start feeling themselves, have a good day. Thought they had a pretty good day against the Commanders, but really for them to go out there and execute and kind of like, just emphatically show, everybody that we could still run the ball. We know Caleb's not here, but we can be that dominating team even against, top talents like the Bills.
Yeah. Yeah. This Falcons team, they've got a long ways to go, but I think that's one of the ways that they've been the most dynamic is their ability to kind of put pressure on teams on the ground. They obviously have a dynamic duo, and I love to be able to say that, for as long as we can here, as long as Tyler Algier sticks around, probably the last season, folks. But, Bijan Robinson, I think in the absence of Darnell Mooney, has really taken a massive step forward and kind of emerged as that dynamic presence in the passing game that they're missing more or less without Mooney out there. He's taken on a very large role and has kind of been like the number one just option overall in the offense. It did look like Drake London was taking a step towards what we were more expecting him to do this year against the Commanders. Feel good about that. And Kyle Pitts has, I think, been the guy that they need him to be this year, perhaps more than any other year. With Mooney out, they need Pitts to emerge as one of those top receiving targets, and I think he's delivered. So I think, after week 3, we were all pretty concerned about the state of this passing attack, but after week 4, I think I feel a lot better. Do you think the passing attack is something that we can rely on against a defense like the Bills?
Yeah, you're going to have to, because this team is kind of just too good, at the end of the day, I think, to really only be able to attack them one way. And so I think that they're just going to have to be a more efficient version of the offense that we saw against the Vikings. There were some missed opportunities in that game. And we saw, in that Commanders matchup that they really focused on the details in the passing attack, the receivers. Everybody seemed to be on the same page, and we saw, much better production out of Drake, and it kind of looked like things were, getting back up to the expectation that many had, had for them coming into the season. And so I think that, Drake London is going to have opportunities. And, so is Bijan in the passing game. I think, especially when you talk about that injury to Matt Milano, that's big. And so, any of those matchups that you could take advantage of, knowing that, there's a chance that you have a third string, fourth string linebacker on Bijan in some of these swing pass situations, or even just kind of like who's going to be covering Kyle Pitts and taking on some of those duties. With the injury at linebacker, who's roaming the middle of the field now, there's going to be some, good opportunities for Michael Penix in this group to get going. And, I don't think they'll need to carry this game, but if they do get into a situation where it looks like they're gonna have to throw the ball around some more, I still feel pretty confident, because I don't think that this is a Bills pass rush that's like extremely daunting. It's solid. And the Falcons O-line has been solid too, though, in its own right. When you look at how they've performed this year, Zach Robinson, Dwayne Leverett have put together a really good protection plan, not asking too much of the quarterback or the O-line to kind of, start this season. So, I think that they have as good a chance, over on the air as they do on the ground.
Yeah, and that'll be important. This is a very tough Bills pass defense, as good as the Falcons have been. The Bills are kind of right there against the pass. Like, they're number 2 in passing yardage allowed, and number, let's see, they're pretty high. And net yards per attempt, they're also 7th. So this is a top 10 pass defense in most respects here. Not going to be easy to move the ball against them. Through the air, luckily the Falcons have the ground game to help, which the Bills are more vulnerable against. But, kind of flipping the sides of the ball here, and we do have a donation from Alex Foster with $5 sake. Since Tre'Shon's here, if the Falcons do beat the Bills, does that mean Adnan is the problem? Well, let's. I'm not willing to make that statement. Let's see if we we don't have enough data, I think, for that. We do know that Adnan came in on the as the Falcons started missing the playoffs every year. That also I think is purely coincidental, for the record. But if we do get the big upset, well, that just means we have to have Tre'Shon on the show more. That's the only option. So, Adnan can't be a bad luck charm. That would just be evil if somehow Adnan was a bad luck charm for this team. But speaking of defenses, Falcons defense, I think, surprisingly elite this year. They played 4 games, haven't faced the toughest of opponents at this point. We know that, but also not a cupcake schedule. But Atlanta in yardage, number 1, and this is per game, guys, so it doesn't matter that they've only played 4 games. Passing yardage, number 1, net yards per attempt, which controls for volume. Number one, rushing, they haven't been as good, but 16th in total rushing yards, and in terms of yards per carry, they're 22nd. So they're more vulnerable there, but they're gonna need this defense to be able to at least slow down Josh Allen to give this offense a chance to keep up. And for a change, this unit is not one that I feel super concerned about going into a big game. Tre'Shon, or you feel the same way?
Yeah, I think what worries me the most, like we're talking about, is really the run defense here, and mostly Josh Allen's legs. You talk about slowing him down. I think the best way to slow him down is to speed him up. I think Allen is like tops in the league in terms of time to throw, meaning that he's holding onto the ball a lot and extending a lot of plays, whether he's turning them into scrambles or pass plays. He's kind of been at the top of that metric for the past couple of years. And so, that's really the big test for this defense is, what are you going to do to kind of, one, force Josh Allen to make a quick decision, but to also force a quick and bad decision. It's one thing if you're blitzing him and then he's just replacing that defender, or then they're getting into their own quick game. But, he's a tough quarterback to game plan for, because sometimes, if you do rush him and you vacate those lanes, then he's, going to go, 15 yards down the field for an easy first down. That's when you look at, Divine Diablo QB spy, something that some of us have been, pushing for, wondering where some of that's been, or kind of like to your point earlier, that's where like a little bit of depth at linebacker would help, with Troy. So, I think obviously, to no surprise, figuring out how to stop Josh Allen is going to be the defense's most difficult task this week. But, in terms of their ability to at least mitigate all the other issues on offense, I think that they've got a really good chance at slowing down their passing attack, kind of like you've mentioned, with the performance that this defense has been able to do through the air has been really impressive. And we're hoping that we can see Terrell return. And even without him, they've still been doing really well, and kind of force this into a, maybe get a Josh Allen bozo game if you can start really pressing him and getting some of those rash decisions that he's known for.
Yeah. I think how they handle Josh Allen is really the most interesting thing of this game for me defensively, because I think so far they basically said, we're going to blitz you. Like, that's just what we're going to do. Falcons are number one in blitz rate in the NFL, 37%. That is like, very aggressive, and no matter what stats you look at. That is a very aggressive blitz rate. And we mentioned, against the Commanders, I think Jeff Ulbrich had a pretty psycho level, blitz of Divine Diablo, playing man coverage on the backside of that. I think they can't necessarily do that and expect to get away with it at this level. But it is interesting because, like you said, you got to speed guys up, and if you can't necessarily get it done with 4, you're gonna be really tempted to send 5 and just take your chances. But I do think this is a game where the Falcons need to really establish a quarterback spy. I think Divine Diablo is the perfect example of that, but I think even Jalen Walker, if they're willing to drop him sometimes, it could be an opportunity to use his unique skill set there. He hasn't been asked to do that yet, but I do think that's always been one of his best abilities, is that he could be, I think, a really high level quarterback spy from the edge position. And I don't know if this is the week that they're going to ask him to do that against Josh Allen of all people, but it's an opportunity for him if he is ready. I think he's already shown that he arguably needs to be starting, especially on early downs, because he's just been their best run defender as an edge guy. And aside from maybe like Zach Harrison, who's huge, so that's a little bit of a different role there. But I'm really curious to see if we do see more QB spy stuff, or see more just Divine Diablo playing zone coverage as opposed to blitzing so much. That could be a wrinkle, this week to take advantage of. And we have seen the Falcons' aggressiveness get used against them in the run game as well. So that could be a way to kind of maybe try to catch the Bills off guard a little bit by switching it up. Curious how that plays out, but that's definitely one to monitor. But yeah, I think the big mismatch here that the Falcons have to be really cognizant of, and it ties into Josh Allen as well with his rushing ability, but the Falcons' run defense has been, I would say, like, underwhelming. It hasn't been problematic so far. They're about average in terms of total rushing yardage allowed, but the Bills are the number 2, rushing attack in the NFL. They're going to try to test the Falcons here. James Cook has been awesome, and we know what Josh Allen can do. So how concerned are you about the Bills' ability to kind of take it to the Falcons on the ground in this game?
Yeah, that's really what I'm nervous about the most here when it comes to this Bills offense, because we haven't really seen Atlanta defend a mobile quarterback the way you would expect, and that was obviously Marcus Mariota in his later years now. So maybe you don't give him the same attention that you would before, but you're gonna have to give Josh Allen and this defense a lot more attention. Falcons are ranked 27th in EPA per rush right now. They're pretty susceptible to, I feel like, explosive runs, which is what's really dragging down that score. The Commanders, I think they had runs of like 2 runs of like 16-10, and then the big explosive run. And so things like that will drag down your EPA. And the Bills, Cook, he's legit. I'm not really sure how most fans view him, but he's a really good running back. I think he's kind of like underrated. And you saw what he does for that offense when he, is shut down and not able to produce. It makes things a lot harder for them. And so where the Falcons are going to have to, I think that's obviously the first person you worry about. Like, Josh Allen is going to make those plays with his legs that just annoy you. He's the best or the second best quarterback, in the NFL right now. So there's just some things that are out of your control, but you have a lot more power when it comes to being able to stop and game plan for Cook. And then, asking Josh Allen to carry a bigger load is really, I think, the best way to kind of go about, stopping this run game, is to put it on his shoulders, see how much that he can do. And, you mentioned it. I think Jalen Walker should be in that first rotation group. Zach Harrison at one of the many spots that he plays for. Zach's been great this season. He's already on pace to like smash the amount of snaps he's had by about 200 compared to the amount of snaps he had last year. He's taken 14 snaps at every single alignment across the line. Extremely valuable player for the Falcons right now. And I think that they do have the right guys to make this stop. And like you said, Kevin, I think they've done some things schematically that they can really switch this up coming into the Bills game and really use those tendencies to their advantage. And use them against the Bills and really kind of come out and, not blitz them, kind of like make them have to work for it a lot differently than they would have expected.
Yeah, and I think that strategy works a lot better if they've got a guy like AJ Terrell out there who they feel very confident, probably in matching up with someone like Keon Coleman, who started off like incredibly. I was like, wow, I'm a dumbass for not drafting him in fantasy. It's since gone back to sort of what I more expected it to look like, which makes me feel slightly better in fantasy. But, the Bills are one of the NFL's elite passing attacks. They are number 7 in passing yardage and all the way up at number 4 in net yards per attempt. 7.5 yards per net yards per attempt right now. Pretty incredible stuff. Almost a full yard better than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are the second best passing attack. The Bucs are the best passing attack the Falcons have faced. Yeah. But the Bills are like a full yard per attempt better, basically. So, This is definitely the biggest test for the Falcons pass defense, which, like we said, number 1 in the NFL, number 1 in most stats. I don't think they're a fluke pass defense, but are they actually number 1 caliber? This is the game I think that's going to tell us a lot about how close they are to being number 1, because if they shut down the Bills passing attack, then I think we have no doubt about the level that this pass defense is on. If they struggle or just have an okay day, then I think we know they're still very good, but they're still going to not be able to shut down elite passing attacks. This is a big test, and obviously, like I said, AJ Terrell being back would be great, but they've got a lot of guys. The Bills don't necessarily have the best individual pass catching talent. I think altogether, with Josh Allen obviously delivering the ball, it's a functional unit. And I think Khalil Shakir is very underrated as sort of the guy that might actually be their number 1 target, but, doesn't necessarily get treated like it. And Keon Coleman's a good role player. Dalton Kincaid can get hot if he's allowed to get favorable matchups. But, this is, I think, the other big test is can the Falcons pass defense be as advertised against what's by far their most difficult opponent in this regard? How are you feeling about the secondary going into this one?
Yeah. I think, you talked about Shakir. That's Shakir Billy Bowman. That's the matchup where, like, if I'm the Bills and I've been looking at film, like, that's probably where I want to go early and kind of test the rookie, see how he's going to do, and maybe even see, how the Falcons plan on, working and covering some of these guys out of the slot or the inline tight ends. Like you mentioned, Kincaid. I know they still got Knox there, and there's like another tight end now, another blocking tight end they have that their fans are raving about, whose name's escaping me right now. And so, I feel like a lot of the guys in the middle of the field, we're going to have to see, how some of those matchups go down. When it comes to Keon Coleman, I think even if AJ Terrell isn't able to step in, I don't feel too bad about Mike Hughes or even D. Alford. I know the two of them didn't have like the best game last week, but they've mostly been fine. And I'm more worried about the middle of the field because, it just kind of dawned on me even now thinking like, the Josh Allen plan is going to have to be really well thought out because, well, Divine Diablo is actually the best coverage linebacker. So is that really who you want to be the QB spy? Maybe that job will go to Caden Ellis, and then you're using Divine Diablo in coverage to worry about Kincaid, who, like you said, pretty athletic tight end, can get hot at times. You have to worry about Shakir with Bowman because, the Falcons are probably going to be, it'll be interesting how they match those personnel groups, right? I think the Bills run a decent amount of 12. Are the Falcons going to match that with nickel? Are they going to be in base? So the passing attack definitely has some concerns for me. Middle of the field is kind of where I'm looking at the most, but mainly just the intermediate because we know Xavier Watts and Jesse Bates have us covered on the deep back middle.
Yeah. No, you bring up a lot of good, interesting schematic decisions here. I think this is going to be one of the more fascinating games for Jeff Ulbrich to what they do, because I could see a strategy like you said. The Bills love 12. And to me, I'd be like, well, let's match it with a little bit heavier look. We know they want to run the ball. We know they want to use a lot of tight ends. I'm curious if we see some like fire zone concepts where we might have maybe Jalen like dropping as a spy, and then we blitz like Caden instead. So we're really keeping Walker more out of it, and having Caden Ellis kind of fill in with the pressure, letting Divine Diablo do a little bit more of the coverage stuff. I think that could be an interesting wrinkle to throw in there. Yeah. Maybe catch him off guard. Use a little bit more like 4 down linemen plus Jalen Walker, and kind of switch up who's dropping and who's blitzing. And if they want to continue to be aggressive there, that could be an interesting way to do that. Also wonder agree. Go.
Oh no, I was just saying I agree. I think 5-man fronts, like you're saying, that's definitely another thing. We've seen them toy with it a little bit, but like you're saying, I really like the idea of Walker kind of being that man that, you can have him either drop or play the run, depending on whatever the down is.
Yeah. So I'm curious to see if they try to, it's been a month. They've had a bye week now. Is this the week we do see Walker, maybe get a little bit of an expanded role? He's been great as an edge rusher. I'm not saying play him at linebacker. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying use his unique athleticism, his ability to drop in coverage a bit more. And not even really play coverage, more just like drop and watch Josh Allen and maybe get your hands up from time to time. That's all I'm asking. I'm not asking you to pattern match or anything like that, but, and maybe kind of counteract some of the things, some of the schematic binds they want to put you in with playing 12 and match it with that. And we know Caden Ellis is a very capable pass rusher, and we want him moving forward. Yes. We don't want him moving backwards.
Yes.
Just send him forward every play and feel much better about that than anything else. But curious to see how they approach that. But, it makes me feel really good that we are able to get, I know we had Brandon Brass with the $2 mention that Xavier Watts right now is beating Malachi Starks in every statistical category, so rise up. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have predicted that. I was Xavier Watts' biggest fan, and I still had Malachi Starks above him. I do wonder if a lot of that has to do with the Ravens defense kind of being the Walking Dead, and it kind of makes it hard to play safety. But, I'm not taking anything away from Watts. He's been better even than I was hoping so far. But the combination of Watts being that very reliable and rangy back-end safety, I think has opened up sort of the box and sort of the middle of the field stuff for Jesse Bates, who has played a much more aggressive role, especially against the run so far this year. I do wonder if this could be sort of a signature Jesse Bates game. It's been a new role for him. I think he's been a little bit maybe kind of warming up to that. Not been bad by any means, but kind of just been like a good player, not necessarily the elite safety we've been thinking. But I'm wondering now, the bye week under his belt, is this the game where we finally see Jesse Bates kind of really take to this new more box focused role and make some impact plays against the Bills.
Yeah, it kind of feels like safeties usually have their best games against like the best quarterbacks in the league. Justin Simmons last year kind of like talked about that dynamic, and he of course comes down. I think that was like his 4th interception in a row when playing Patrick Mahomes. And we've seen Bates rise to the occasion multiple times. So, I do think that this game, like you said, it has all the makings to kind of be, a Jesse Bates signature performance. We just talked about how, I think that the Bills' strength in terms of their passing attack is over the middle. So, we know there's going to be some opportunities there to maybe jump a skinny post, maybe get a pick six, take him back to that. I think Bates has like 2 of his 3 like pick sixes in the red helmets too. I don't know. We'll get the stat guys on that for us, but
Evan, get on that, please.
Like, yeah. Somebody, this feels like a really good game. Like you mentioned, it's like I think for Bates, it has kind of been like when somebody new gets hired at your job and like that they're gonna do some of what you were doing, but you're like, yeah, sure, whatever. This guy's gonna be gone next year. Jesse Bates has done that with Richie Grant, with Justin Simmons. Now there's another new guy that they hired, and he's like, yeah, sure, kid, sure. And then he's like, oh, okay, wait, no, hold on, he's actually pretty good. Hold on. So I think it's taken him a second to acclimate, and now he has like, okay, I do have more freedom. I can kind of like take care of just like be that box safety a little bit more, not have to worry about who's got the back end or anything like that, because Watts has it covered. And hopefully we see that translate this week and he's able to play free and make some plays.
Yeah. I think it was a real like wake up call for everyone. I think when we talked about it on Tuesday takes after week 4, where it was like, oh, it looks like Xavier Watts might be out of position here. Oh, never mind. Nope, never mind. He's actually in position. He's got the interception. Okay, never mind. I don't know if that works against like Josh Allen's arm. I don't know if he can get there in time. It definitely worked against Mariota. So no, yeah. and he was very confident about his ability to get there. But
first round quarterback. So yeah, comparable. Pretty.
Hey, I mean, definitely no doubt there. But I think Watts has earned everyone's trust, and he's not going to be perfect. You talk about the same game. Couldn't quite get the running back. I don't really like ding him that much for that. It looked like a good tackle attempt to me. It looked like he got hands on him. He took a good angle. He was there, and Rodriguez just shook him off. It is what it is. It happens sometimes. So it's not like he was out of position or totally whiffed or tried to shoulder slam him or something. It didn't work out. So I'm not really concerned about that. And I think he's ultimately been just a really bright spot for this defense. And, I hope that the Bates, everyone sort of starts to trust and just play a little bit more confident and free. And, I think it all kind of comes down to the front here, which we haven't talked about yet, other than really shouting out Jalen Walker and maybe the weird things he can do in this game. But, this is maybe the most critical game for this front, because the Bills, the Falcons have apparently lifted themselves into like the elite of the NFL in terms of pass protection, which just blows my mind, considering who's playing at this point. But the Bills are in the top 5 as well in pass protection. They're 4th, and this is a team that's hard to get pressure on. You mentioned it. Josh Allen's got some of the longest time to throw of any quarterback in the NFL. He's happy to sit back there and wait for plays to develop. The Falcons, and obviously if teams send pressure, he's liable to escape. So it's difficult to do that too. So, how this front is able to handle it, this is going to be their toughest test, because they have to respect the threat of the run. The Bills are one of the best rushing attacks in the NFL, whether it's Cook or Josh Allen himself. They have to really be disciplined, and the discipline has been an issue at times this year. They also have to find a way to get there with 4 or 5, because you can't really do too much blitzing. They're probably not going to be able to play as much man on the back end as they would like. They've been one of the better man coverage teams in the NFL. Probably going to have to lean more on their zone coverage, especially if they want to blitz. This is an important game for this front, who have a number of guys. Take Taquan Graham. Hopefully will be back. Maybe that'll help bolster the run defense a little bit if he's ready to go. But how important is the front 4 in the Falcons' ability to kind of slow down this Bills offense?
Yeah, I think you made a really good point. about Josh Allen's legs, and to like quantify that, he has scrambled on about 20% of his dropbacks, and that's the second highest rate among all QBs. He has the most rushing yards off of scrambles, which is 208. And then he has the seventh most passing yards when scrambling with 83. So a big part of that offense is just him making things happen, freelancing. So you have to kind of stop him before he's able to get there. And that means keeping him contained within the pocket, not letting him scramble and escape. Lane discipline is going to be really big this week for this front. And I think that's really what it's going to come down to. You know, it's not about doing anything special for Josh Allen. What Josh Allen is able to do is take advantage of people that aren't doing their jobs, that are, you know, out of their spots, and not keeping contained, because when you condense that pocket, you know, it's harder for any quarterback, regardless of how big or strong they are, to escape versus when you give them free lanes and things like that. And, you know, that's kind of like, it's really funny. NFL Pro has like different insights every week, and they usually do one kind of comparing, you know, the two teams' stats and strengths and weaknesses. And this week they're talking about the Bills offense allowing like the lowest pressure rate in the league at 22% and the longest time to throw at 2.9 seconds. And the Falcons, you know, per NFL Pro, have the seventh highest pressure rate in the league. And so, you know, we're seeing these two strengths that are going to collide here. And when I think about, you know, why have the Falcons been able to succeed so well in terms of a pass rush, it's not because any individual one player is just going crazy. This is a pass rush by committee. These are guys that are, you know, executing their stunts extremely well right now, that are winning their one-on-ones when they do have the opportunity. You know, we've seen Jalen Walker has a win on a one-on-one. We've seen Leonard Floyd with a win on one-on-one. Same with Zach Harrison. But we've seen also a lot come from sim pressures, from blitzes. So I do like that the Falcons are already structured in a way that their pressure comes from play design and execution. It does not come from just go be a dog, just go win. Because when you go up against somebody like this, you have to be able to have a little bit more behind it than just that. And I think that, you know, the Falcons have a good, you know, foundation in place to at least, you know, be somewhat of a threat to Josh Allen, or to at least contain him within that pocket instead of letting him break outside of it.
Yeah, and you almost wonder if it's better to not push it too far and be a little bit more measured with how you rush. And you know, it's hard to do that because every muscle and every instinct in your body as a defensive lineman is like, get to the quarterback as fast as you can, just get there, it doesn't matter. And Josh Allen's gonna make you pay for that. That's kind of, he's made a living off of it, is guys think that they've got him, and if they get out of where they're supposed to be, or they cut too far inside trying to grab him, he's just going to escape. So you have to have a plan B. If you're going to rush aggressively, you know, you've got to have someone back there waiting for him, or you have to be playing zone coverage. And, you know, it's going to be really fascinating, I think, to see how the Falcons approach this. And I think they do have the personnel. Like we mentioned, Divine Diablo, I think he can be a great QB spy. But this is kind of what Jalen Walker, I think, can be really uniquely good at, is his ability to play this kind of QB spy role where he can do it as an edge rusher and not as a linebacker, but give you a lot of that change of direction ability that most edge rushers just can't give you. So I don't know if it's going to be this week. We're all kind of hoping to see it, and at some point, I'm sure the Falcons will start asking him to do this. I don't know how quickly he'll be ready for that. I don't know if he's ready for it now, but if he is, can't think of a better game to break those skills out of the package. You know, rip the bubble wrap open here and get Jalen Walker doing what we think he can be great at. But you mentioned,
and I like that you mentioned from the edge too, Kevin, because that is, I think, a misconception. A lot of people, when they hear QB spy, they immediately assume that it's the middle linebacker. You can QB spy anybody. People do it with a D. I've seen people do it with one text, three texts. You can do it with edges. You can do it with anybody in the field. So, you know, I think that's a really good point that you mentioned, that like it just because he's QB spy, it doesn't mean that we're asking him to do a whole position change. You know, the Falcons have been adamant about outside linebacker, but you know, QB spy does not mean that you know, it's only reserved for one position. Anybody can do that. And I do think that this would be, you know, a good opportunity because you could do some fun sim pressures with that, right? Where you send Caden Ellis to replace for Jalen Walker dropping back so that you don't lose, numbers game in the pass rush and you have him replace Ellis. That could be a confusing look for the quarterback. That's something that we haven't seen the team do yet. So kind of like we said earlier, breaking some of those tendencies that, you've kind of presented to offenses with that first quarter sample size.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I'm really excited to see how this Falcons defense plays against a great offense. I don't remember the last time anyone's been able to talk about that, but this will be, I think, one of the more illuminating games of the season for the Falcons defense, and really excited to see how they do it. But we got Alex Foster at the $5 says, honestly, if the Falcons just look like they belong in this game, I'll take it. I'd love a win, but I'm trying to be realistic. If we win, I'm gonna be way too optimistic. Yes, we're all in on Super Bowl if the Falcons beat the Bills this week. No, this is an important game. And I think you're absolutely right, Alex. Like if they just give the Bills a good game, that's all we really need to see. If they want to, this next 2 games, it's a brutal 2-game stretch. The 49ers are injured, but they're still 4-1. That's a team that's not winning with much margin for error, but they are still winning, and they still have Kyle Shanahan, who's going to give hell to most defensive coordinators, no matter who he has on offense. The Falcons have an opportunity here to take down the highest ranked team in the AFC and maybe the highest ranked team in the NFC, depending on what happens this week and back-to-back weeks. And there's no better way for this team to announce themselves as no, we're serious than to pull that off. Will they do it? That's definitely more up for debate. But with this Bills game, I mean, how are you feeling about their chances? Do you think this is a realistic upset scenario here? Obviously, they are underdogs. We're not saying they should be favored or anything, but do you think they match up well enough that we should be semi-hopeful for a miracle? Or maybe they don't even need a miracle. Maybe they could just play a pretty good game and find a way to take down the Bills.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not... That's probably the thing for me that I've always enjoyed about the NFL is that any given Sunday is it's not just a movie title. That's a real mantra that we see play out every week. And I do think the Falcons match up well enough to not just beat the Bills, but to beat anybody in this league. They were neck and neck with Tampa, who is arguably the other, top dog in the NFC. So, we'll see how they perform against the 49ers after they get to the Bills. But just kind of looking at this Bills game, this is a really good opportunity in terms of just a measuring stick. How far are you really from competing with teams of this caliber? And what does that look like? What does your rosters look like compared stacked up to theirs? And kind of give you an idea of if this team is on the right track or not. There's no such thing as moral victories, but you come out of this game and it's a nail biter and you lose by 3 in a tough loss. It's going to feel a lot different than if they, blow you out the same way that, we saw Carolina do them a couple of weeks ago. And so I think that this team has all of the ability, to perform and compete in this game. It's just going to come down to, once again, are they going to execute? Which offense is going to show up? Is it going to be the detail-oriented one that we saw against the Commanders? Is it going to be the one that, showed up against the Panthers? This team has to curb its volatility. That's something that you and I have been kind of talking about, is they've got to, when they have a dip down or when something goes wrong, they've got to mitigate how, bad it is, and I think that, this Bills team, again, this is those kinds of opponents that take advantage of your mistakes. These are those kind of opponents that don't let you get away with playing a bad game or getting a bunch of penalties and things like that. So, it's going to be a really good test all the way around to just kind of get a good look at this team. And, like you're saying, are they legit, or, are they pretending? Are they just frisky? Whatever, whatever you want to say. I think we'll have a good idea after this 2-game stretch.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot about where the Falcons are in their growth and in their sort of development. And these 2 games aren't must wins. I think it would be really good to get one of them somehow. That would help you a lot to be 500. And then you go into the rest of your schedule, which is much easier on the whole. There's a couple pretty tough games in there still. We know that the Rams lurk at the end of the year. Bucks are never going to be an easy out. And as bad as the Saints have looked at times this year, we all know the Saints are going to play this team they're going to give the Falcons everything they've got. That you can't ever count those games as easy, no matter how bad the Saints are. And vice versa for the Falcons. No matter how bad the Falcons are, they're going to give the Saints hell every time they play. So it's not easy, but it's not as hard as it has been. So if you go into that stretch at 500, I think they're set up well to finish strong, and they'll be battle tested too, which is important. And they'll be ready for whatever the NFL throws at them. Weirdly, I think I'm more concerned about how they play against some of those lesser teams on their schedule. They have a tendency to kind of play to their competition, which means that they should look really good the next 2 weeks. And then hopefully they won't follow that with a huge letdown against the Dolphins, who, are just not that you got to win that game. in the grand scheme of the schedule, you got to win that game, guys. Got to win that one. But
I'm getting such 2017 Jay Cutler Dolphins vibes from that game. I don't even want to touch it, but yeah, it's one of those ones where I'm like,
yeah. If the Falcons somehow win this 2-game stretch here and go into that Dolphins game at 4-2, I'm going to be like, they're losing that Dolphins game. I have no doubt. They're going to blow that Dolphins game for no reason, just because that is just the most Falcons thing that I could possibly imagine. But Tre'Shon, thank you so much for coming on, filling in tonight. Guys, he's Tre'Shon Diaz at Ep349. We're both feeling fairly optimistic, that there's a good opportunity here for the Falcons to at least make this a great primetime game. The Falcons delivered in primetime pretty much every time lately, which is why the NFL gave them a bunch of primetime games this year. So hope they can keep that up, because I enjoy the primetime games. Don't love recording shows at midnight or later, but it is what it is. I'll gladly do it if they get lots of primetime games and play well in them. So, but Tre'Shon, tell the people where they can find your stuff. Tell them about All Trey Phases. What's going on there?
Yeah. You guys can find me at Trey3Sean on Twitter, and also at All Trey Phases now on Twitter and YouTube. Just been doing some more video breakdowns, kind of just going into a bit more detail about the stuff that we talk here and the things that we write about at the Falcoholic. So, check out all of our work at the Falcoholic, of course, and give the video content a look as well.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Go check that out. Good film review stuff there, and I know he'll be working on more as the season goes on, so definitely go give that channel a subscription as well. And while you're here, you might as well subscribe to this channel too. Also throw us a like. We appreciate that. If you want to support the show, you can leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Those definitely help us out if you haven't done that yet, even if you're a video enjoyer. If you've got a Spotify, if you've got an Apple Podcasts account, take 2 seconds, leave us a 5-star review. It's a big deal. Apparently, that's what the algo gods tell me. So, we all obey the algo gods. So, can't argue with that. But if you want to support us, patreon.com/Falcoholic Live or YouTube channel memberships. YouTube more for the video folks and Patreon for the podcast folks. And we'll be back. I'll be on with a Bills guest, I believe, for the game preview, prime time preview. Love to see that. So you'll get a Bills perspective on this upcoming game. And then, of course, we'll have a post-game show for you on Monday night late. And, I may be traveling or some other things that on Monday, but we'll be doing our best to get you a live post-game. But if all else fails, it'll be recorded, and we'll get it to you as soon as we can after the game. But thank you guys so much for joining us here on the Falcoholic Live, presented by FanDuel. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday night. Enjoy Thursday night football. I haven't even checked. I'm so far off of the bye week has just sapped my brain. So I'm not following Thursday night football, but enjoy it. I hope it's a good game, and then we'll see you guys. Enjoy a stress-free Sunday, 2 in a row. How often does that happen for this team? And then Monday night football, Falcons a little bit earlier, 7:15. So we'll get that too. So until next time, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Falcoholic Live and Dirty Birds and Brews. Have a good night, folks.